My parents forced me to have a secret wedding to protect my lonely sister, so I destroyed the lie by revealing her fiancé and crashed their fantasy. I never thought my own parents would ask me to hide the happiest day of my life, just to protect someone who had spent years resenting my every success. But sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the ones who place the heaviest conditions on that love. My name is Isabella Turner, and I'm 27 years old. I work as an event designer, which means I spend my days creating magical moments for other people. Dreamy weddings, milestone celebrations, corporate galas that leave everyone talking for months. I love what I do because there's something beautiful about taking someone's vision and making it come to life. Watching their eyes light up when they see their dreams transformed into reality. 6 months ago, Michael proposed to me on a quiet beach in Maine just as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was perfect, intimate, romantic, everything I'd ever dreamed of. When I called my parents to share the news, they seemed thrilled. My mother actually cried happy tears over the phone, and my father said he couldn't wait to walk me down the aisle. But as the weeks passed and I started sharing my wedding plans, something began to feel off. Every time I mentioned the guest list growing to around 200 people, my mother would make these little comments like, "Oh honey, are you sure you need such a big celebration?" When I showed them photos of the gorgeous venue I'd found, a historic mansion with sprawling gardens, my father would wince and say, "That seems awfully extravagant." At first I thought they were just worried about the cost, even though Michael and I were paying for everything ourselves. I make good money as an event designer, and Michael is a successful architect. We weren't asking for any financial help, we just wanted their blessing and support. The real reason behind their hesitation didn't become clear until a month later, during what I thought would be a casual family dinner to discuss wedding details. My older sister Clarissa was there, as usual. She's 30 years old and has been living with my parents for the past 3 years since she lost her job at a marketing firm. Officially, she's between opportunities. But I've noticed that her job searching seems to consist mainly of scrolling through social media and complaining about how unfair the world is to people like her. Clarissa has always had a complicated relationship with my success. When I graduated college summa cum laude, she made snide comments about how some people just get lucky with easy professors. When I started my event planning business and it took off quickly, she said I was privileged and had connections most people don't have. When I bought my first apartment at 25, she told our parents it was showing off and made her feel bad about still living at home. So when the conversation turned to my wedding plans that night, I should have seen what was coming. "Isabella," my mother said carefully, setting down her fork, "your father and I have been talking and we're a bit concerned about your wedding plans." "Concerned how?" I asked, though something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "Well, it's just that it's going to be such a big event, and with all the social media posts and photos." She glanced at Clarissa, who was staring down at her plate. "We're worried about how it might affect your sister." I looked between my parents and Clarissa, trying to understand what I was hearing. How would my wedding affect Clarissa? "You know she's been going through a difficult time," my father said. "She's struggling with her career. She doesn't have anyone special in her life right now. And she's been dealing with some depression. Seeing you have this huge, elaborate wedding might be really hard on her emotionally." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I felt Michael's hand find mine under the table, squeezing gently. "So what exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, though I had a horrible feeling I already knew. "Maybe you could have a smaller celebration," my mother said quickly. "Something intimate, just family. You could always have a big party later, maybe for your first anniversary, when Clarissa is in a better place." "You want me to have a small wedding because Clarissa might feel bad that she's not getting married?" "When you put it like that, it sounds terrible," my father said. "But we're just thinking about family harmony. You know how sensitive your sister is." I looked at Clarissa, who still hadn't said a word. Her jaw was tight, and she was gripping her water glass so hard her knuckles were white. "Clarissa," I said directly, "is this what you want? Do you want me to change my wedding plans?" She finally looked up, and for a moment, I saw something that looked almost like guilt flash across her face. But then her expression hardened. "I never asked for any of this," she said quietly. "I never asked to be the reason you can't have the wedding you want." "That's not what we're saying," my mother jumped in quickly. "We just want everyone to be comfortable and happy." "Everyone except me, apparently," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. The dinner ended awkwardly, with my parents insisting they just wanted me to think about it and Clarissa disappearing to her room without saying goodbye. Michael and I drove home in tense silence, both of us processing what had just happened. Over the next few weeks, the pressure intensified. My parents would call with new suggestions for making the wedding more intimate. They floated ideas like having the ceremony at City Hall with just immediate family. Or maybe a small backyard gathering with just the people who really matter. Each conversation felt like a betrayal. I started having flashbacks to other times in my life when my achievements had been minimized or hidden to protect Clarissa's feelings. My high school graduation party had been canceled because Clarissa was going through a breakup. My college acceptance celebration had been toned down because Clarissa hadn't gotten into her first choice school. My promotion to senior event coordinator had been barely acknowledged at family dinners because Clarissa was having trouble finding work. I began to realize that my entire life had been lived in the shadow of my sister's fragility, and my parents had trained me to accept that as normal. But this was my wedding. This was supposed to be my day, my celebration, my moment to be surrounded by everyone I loved and to start my marriage with joy and excitement. The idea of hiding it, minimizing it, or postponing it felt like being asked to deny my own happiness. Michael was incredibly supportive, but I could see the situation was wearing on him too. One night, about 2 months before our planned wedding date, he sat me down for a serious conversation. "Isabella," he said, taking my hands in his, "I need you to know that whatever you decide about this wedding, I'm with you 100%. If you want to elope tomorrow, we'll elope. If you want to have the biggest party this city has ever seen, we'll do that. But I can't watch your family make you feel guilty for wanting to celebrate our love anymore." That conversation gave me the clarity I needed. Michael was right. This was about celebrating our love, not managing everyone else's emotions. I decided to have one more conversation with my parents, but this time I was going in with boundaries. I called them the next day and asked if we could meet for coffee. I spent hours preparing what I wanted to say, because I knew this conversation would determine the future of my relationship with my family. We met at a quiet cafe near their house, the same place where they used to take Clarissa and me for treats when we were kids. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Mom, Dad," I began. "I've thought a lot about what you asked me, and I need to be honest with you about how it makes me feel." They both leaned forward, looking hopeful that I was about to agree to their plan. "I understand that you're worried about Clarissa, and I love her too, but what you're asking me to do, to hide my happiness, to minimize my wedding, to basically pretend this isn't one of the most important days of my life, it's not fair, and it's not healthy." My mother's face fell. "Honey, we're not asking you to hide anything. We just think a smaller celebration would be—" "Mom," I interrupted gently, "can you hear yourself? You're asking me to have a different wedding than the one I want because my 30-year-old sister might feel sad that she's not getting married. That's not protecting her, that's enabling her. That's not what this is about," my father said, his voice getting defensive. "This is about family. This is about considering other people's feelings. What about my feelings, Dad? What about the fact that I've spent my entire life making myself smaller so Clarissa wouldn't feel bad about herself? What about the fact that this is my wedding, and I should be able to celebrate it however I want?" The conversation continued for over an hour, with my parents alternating between guilt trips, logical arguments, and emotional appeals. They brought up everything from family loyalty to financial responsibility to what would the neighbors think if the family seemed divided. Finally, I realized that no amount of reasoning was going to change their minds. They had decided that protecting Clarissa's feelings was more important than supporting my happiness, and they weren't going to budge. "Okay," I said, standing up from the table. "I need you both to understand something very clearly. I'm going to have the wedding that Michael and I want. It's going to be beautiful, it's going to be joyful, and it's going to be exactly what we've planned. You are invited to be part of that celebration, but only if you can be genuinely happy for us. If you can't do that, if you're going to spend the whole time worried about Clarissa's feelings, or making passive-aggressive comments about the size or scope of our celebration, then maybe it's better if you don't come." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents stared at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. "You're saying you'll uninvite us from your own wedding?" my mother whispered. "I'm saying I won't let anyone, even family, turn my wedding day into a source of guilt or anxiety. This day is about love and celebration, and if you can't bring that energy, then yes, Maybe you shouldn't be there. I left the cafe feeling shaky but oddly liberated. For the first time in my life, I had drawn a clear boundary with my parents and refused to sacrifice my happiness for someone else's comfort. But the real shock came 2 days later. I was at work, putting the finishing touches on a corporate event, when my phone rang. It was my mother, and she sounded different, nervous, almost frantic. "Isabella, we need to talk. Can you come over tonight? It's important." Something in her voice made me agree, even though I was still angry about our coffee shop conversation. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, I found them sitting in the living room with Clarissa. She looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with her hands and avoiding eye contact. "Sit down, honey," my mother said. "There's something we need to tell you." I sat across from them, my heart racing. Had something happened? Was someone sick? "It's about Clarissa," my father began, then stopped, looking at my sister expectantly. Clarissa took a deep breath and finally looked at me. "Isabella, I haven't been completely honest with you. With any of you, actually." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I've been seeing someone, for almost 2 years now. His name is David, and we've been talking about getting engaged." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, then at my parents, trying to process what I was hearing. "You've had a boyfriend for 2 years?" I said slowly. "And you've been pretending to be single and depressed about not having anyone in your life?" "It's complicated," she said quickly. "David lives in Chicago, and he's been going through a divorce. It wasn't official until recently, and I didn't want to introduce him to the family until everything was settled. So while I've been asked to minimize my wedding because you're supposedly heartbroken about being alone, you've actually been in a serious relationship that's moving toward engagement?" Clarissa's face flushed red. "I never asked you to change your wedding plans. That was Mom and Dad's idea." I turned to my parents, fury building in my chest. "Did you know about this?" The guilty looks on their faces told me everything I needed to know. "We found out about David a few weeks ago," my mother admitted, "but Clarissa asked us not to say anything until she was ready. So you've been pressuring me to have a secret wedding to protect the feelings of someone who's been lying to all of us about having a boyfriend?" "It's not that simple," my father said. "Even if Clarissa is seeing someone, that doesn't mean—" "Stop." I held up my hand. "Just stop talking." I looked around the room at my family, my parents who had spent months trying to manipulate me into hiding my happiness, and my sister who had been living a lie while I was asked to sacrifice my dreams to protect her fictional sadness. "I can't believe this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't believe you've put me through months of guilt and pressure based on a complete lie." "Isabella, please let us explain," my mother pleaded. "Explain what?" "Explain how you decided that Clarissa's fake problems were more important than my real happiness? Explain how you've spent my entire life asking me to make myself smaller so she could feel bigger?" I stood up, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. "You know what? I'm done. I'm done with this family's twisted priorities. I'm done being the one who has to sacrifice for everyone else's comfort, and I'm done pretending that this is normal or healthy." "What does that mean?" Clarissa asked, looking genuinely scared for the first time. "It means you're not invited to my wedding. Any of you." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother started crying and my father's face went pale. "You can't be serious," he said. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life. I tried to include you in the celebration, and you turned it into a source of manipulation and guilt. You prioritized protecting a lie over supporting my happiness. I won't have that energy at my wedding." I walked toward the door, then turned back one more time. "For the record, Clarissa, I'm happy that you have someone in your life. I hope you'll be genuinely happy for me too someday. But until this family learns how to celebrate success instead of hiding it, I need to protect my own peace." I left that house and didn't look back. The next few weeks were difficult but strangely liberating. I threw myself into wedding planning with a new sense of freedom, knowing that every decision was mine to make without having to worry about who might be offended or hurt by my choices. Michael and I decided to stick with our original plan: the historic mansion, the garden ceremony, the reception for 200 guests. We invited everyone we truly cared about: our friends, Michael's wonderful family, my college roommates, colleagues who had become close friends, and even some of our favorite vendors who had become part of our extended chosen family. I hired the best photographer I could find, ordered flowers that would make the venue look like something out of a fairy tale, and chose a menu that perfectly reflected our tastes and style. For the first time in months, planning my wedding felt joyful instead of stressful. 3 days before the wedding, my mother called. "Isabella," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "please reconsider. We're your parents. We should be at your wedding." "You should be," I agreed. "But you chose not to be when you decided that manipulating me was more important than supporting me. We made mistakes, but we love you. Doesn't that count for something?" Love isn't just a feeling, Mom. It's actions. It's choices. It's how you treat someone when those feelings are tested. And you chose to prioritize everyone else's comfort over my happiness. What if we promise to be different going forward? Then prove it by respecting my decision now. Prove it by taking responsibility for your actions instead of trying to guilt me into ignoring them. Prove it by giving me the space I need to heal from the damage that's been done. She was quiet for a long moment. "Will you ever forgive us?" "I hope so," I said honestly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean going back to the way things were. It means building something new and healthier, and that's going to take time." My wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with the kind of golden autumn light that makes everything look magical. As I got ready with my bridesmaids, women who had supported me unconditionally throughout this entire ordeal, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in months. When I walked down the aisle and saw Michael waiting for me, his face lit up with pure joy and love. I knew I had made the right choice. Our ceremony was everything we had dreamed of. Intimate despite the crowd, meaningful, and filled with the kind of genuine celebration that I had been afraid my family would poison with their guilt and manipulation. The reception was incredible. Our friends gave hilarious speeches. Michael's father welcomed me to their family with tears in his eyes, and we danced until midnight surrounded by people who genuinely wanted to celebrate our love. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during the dinner, when my maid of honor stood up to give her toast. "I've watched Isabella plan hundreds of events over the years," she said, "and I've never seen her happier than she is today. Not just because she's marrying the love of her life, but because she chose to surround herself with people who truly support her happiness. Isabella, you've shown all of us what it means to choose yourself, to set boundaries, and to refuse to make yourself smaller for anyone else's comfort. Your love story isn't just about you and Michael, it's about learning to love yourself enough to demand the respect you deserve." The entire room erupted in applause, and I found myself crying happy tears as Michael pulled me close. Later that night, as we were heading to our hotel suite, my phone buzzed with notifications. The photographer had already posted some preview shots on social media, and our friends were sharing them with beautiful captions about love and celebration. Within hours, the photos had been seen by hundreds of people, including extended family members who had been wondering why my parents and sister weren't in any of the pictures. My phone started ringing with calls from aunts, uncles, and cousins who wanted to know why they hadn't heard about the wedding beforehand, and why my immediate family wasn't there. By the time Michael and I returned from our honeymoon in Italy, the story had spread through our entire extended family network. The consequences for my parents and Clarissa were swift, and exactly what they deserved. My father's sister called him to express her disappointment that they had missed Isabella's beautiful wedding. When he tried to explain their side of the story, she was appalled by their behavior and told him so directly. My mother's book club friends, many of whom had known me since I was a child, started asking pointed questions about why they hadn't heard about the wedding, and why the family seemed to have issues. But the most satisfying consequence came for Clarissa. When family members found out that she had been hiding a serious relationship while Isabella was being pressured to downplay her wedding, they were not sympathetic. My cousin Sarah, who had always been close to our family, actually called Clarissa out publicly at a family barbecue. "Wait," Sarah said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "you had a boyfriend the whole time Isabella was being asked to have a quiet wedding so you wouldn't feel bad about being single. And you just let that happen?" Clarissa tried to explain about David's divorce and wanting to wait until it was official, but the damage was done. The family members who had initially felt sorry for her difficult situation suddenly saw her as selfish and manipulative. The pressure on all three of them intensified when David finally did propose to Clarissa 6 months later. She called me to share the news, clearly hoping we could reconcile now that she was also engaged. "Isabella," she said, her voice hesitant, "I know things have been difficult between us, but I wanted you to know that David proposed. We're thinking about a spring wedding." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "I hope you'll be very happy together." "I was hoping." Maybe we could talk about everything that happened. Maybe we could work things out before my wedding. I was quiet for a moment, considering my response carefully. Clarissa, I'm genuinely happy that you're engaged and that you found someone who makes you happy. But working things out isn't just about talking, it's about acknowledging the harm that was done and taking responsibility for it. I know Mom and Dad handled things badly, but I never meant for any of this to happen. You may not have meant for it to happen, but you let it happen. You watched our parents pressure me to hide my wedding to protect your feelings, and you never once said, "This isn't necessary because I'm actually fine." You let me be the bad guy for wanting my own celebration while you were secretly planning your own future with David. She was quiet for a long moment. I was scared, she finally said. I was scared that if I told everyone I was happy, they would stop paying attention to me. It was the first honest thing she'd said to me in years, and I felt a tiny crack in the wall of anger I'd built around my heart. I understand being scared, I said, but your fear doesn't justify letting me suffer for it. And until you can really acknowledge that, not just say sorry but actually understand how your choices affected me, I don't think we're ready to have a relationship. Clarissa's wedding planning became a source of stress for my parents in ways they never anticipated. Family members who had seen my wedding photos kept making comparisons, asking why Clarissa's engagement had been kept secret for so long, and generally treating the whole family with suspicion. My mother called me 8 months after my wedding crying. "Isabella, I don't know how to fix this. The whole family thinks we're terrible parents. Your cousin Sarah barely speaks to us. Uncle Jim asked your father directly if we had lost our minds with how we treated you. Even Clarissa's future in-laws are asking questions about family dynamics. I'm sorry you're going through that, Mom, but those are consequences of choices you made. But we were trying to keep the family together. No, you were trying to control me. There's a difference. Keeping a family together means supporting each member's happiness and growth. Controlling someone means manipulating them into doing what's convenient for everyone else. How do we fix this?" she asked desperately. "By learning from it, by understanding why what you did was wrong, not just accepting that it had bad consequences. By respecting my boundaries going forward instead of trying to guilt me into ignoring them." Meanwhile, my life was flourishing in ways I never could have imagined. The photos from my wedding had caught the attention of several high-profile clients, and my event planning business was busier than ever. I started specializing in weddings for clients who had difficult family situations, and I found deep satisfaction in helping other people create beautiful celebrations despite toxic family dynamics. Michael and I bought a beautiful house with a garden where we hosted dinner parties for our chosen family of friends. We traveled, we pursued hobbies we loved, and we built a life that was authentically ours without constantly worrying about who might be offended by our choices. A year after my wedding, Clarissa got married in a ceremony that was, ironically, much smaller and quieter than mine had been. David's family was very traditional and conservative, and they preferred an intimate celebration. The wedding was lovely, but the family dynamics were awkward, with many relatives still unclear about the timeline of events and why there had been so much drama around my celebration. At Clarissa's reception, my aunt pulled me aside. "Isabella," she said, "I owe you an apology. When your parents first explained why you had gotten married without them there, I thought maybe you were being harsh. But after hearing the whole story and seeing how everything played out, I realize you were protecting yourself from a really unhealthy situation." "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "It means a lot to have that validation. Your wedding looked absolutely magical, by the way." "I'm sorry I missed it, but I understand why the guest list was limited to people who truly supported you." That conversation was repeated several times throughout the evening, with various family members expressing their regret about not understanding the situation sooner and their admiration for how I had handled it. 2 years after my wedding, my parents asked if we could meet for coffee, the same cafe where I had first tried to set boundaries about my wedding plans. They looked older, more tired, but also somehow more humble than I remembered. "Isabella," my father began, "we've spent a lot of time thinking about everything that happened, and we want you to know that we understand now how wrong we were." "We went to counseling," my mother added, "both couples counseling and family therapy. We started going because we were so upset about how the family was treating us after your wedding, but we ended up learning a lot about our own behavior." I listened as they explained how therapy had helped them understand their pattern of protecting Clarissa at my expense, how they had trained both of us to accept an unhealthy dynamic as normal, and how their fear of conflict had led them to enable destructive behavior instead of addressing it. "We realize now that asking you to hide your wedding wasn't about protecting Clarissa," my father said. "It was about protecting ourselves from having to deal with her reaction. We made you responsible for managing her emotions, instead of teaching her to manage them herself. And we realize that this wasn't the first time," my mother added. "Looking back, we can see how many times we asked you to make yourself smaller, so we wouldn't have to address problems with your sister. That wasn't fair to either of you. It was the conversation I had been waiting for 2 years. But it was also bittersweet. I was glad they finally understood, but I couldn't help thinking about how different things might have been if they had been willing to see this pattern years earlier. I appreciate you telling me this," I said, "and I'm glad you're working on yourselves. But I need you to understand that this is going to be a slow process for me. Trust isn't just rebuilt with one conversation." "We understand," my father said. "We're not asking you to forgive us right away, or to go back to the way things were. We just want you to know that we're committed to doing better, and we hope that someday we can earn back your trust." Over the following months, my parents proved their commitment to change through their actions, not just their words. They respected my boundaries without argument. They stopped making excuses for Clarissa's behavior, and they started treating me like an adult whose choices deserved respect even when they didn't understand them. When Michael and I announced that we were expecting our first child, they were overjoyed but careful not to overstep. They asked permission before sharing the news with extended family. They respected our decisions about the pregnancy and birth plan, and they made it clear that they would support whatever choices we made as parents. Clarissa and I have rebuilt a relationship too, though it's different from what we had before. She's in therapy working on her own issues with self-worth and jealousy, and she's made genuine efforts to understand how her behavior affected me. We're not as close as we once were, but we're honest with each other in a way we never were before. Today, 3 years after my wedding, I look back on that difficult period as one of the most important times in my life. It was when I learned that love without respect isn't really love at all, and that protecting toxic people from the consequences of their actions isn't kindness, it's enabling. I learned that setting boundaries isn't cruel, even when it hurts people you love. I learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish when others are trying to sacrifice your happiness for their convenience. And I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to participate in unhealthy dynamics, even if it means enduring their anger and disappointment. My business continues to thrive, and I've become known in my industry as someone who helps clients navigate difficult family situations around major life events. I've planned weddings for clients whose parents disapproved of their partners, whose siblings were jealous of their success, whose families tried to hijack their celebrations for their own purposes. Each time I share my own story and help them understand that their happiness doesn't have to be held hostage by other people's emotions. I teach them that it's possible to love your family while still protecting yourself from their dysfunction. Michael and I now have a beautiful daughter, and we're raising her to understand that her worth isn't dependent on making other people comfortable. We're teaching her to be kind and considerate, but also to value herself enough to demand respect from others. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had given in to my family's pressure and had the small, hidden wedding they wanted. I think about the message that would have sent to my daughter someday. That women should make themselves smaller to protect other people's feelings. That family harmony is more important than personal happiness. That love means accepting disrespect and manipulation. Instead, she'll grow up seeing photos of her parents' beautiful wedding, surrounded by people who truly celebrated our love. She'll learn that authentic relationships are built on mutual respect, not guilt and obligation, and she'll understand that the most important relationship she'll ever have is the one with herself, and that protecting that relationship sometimes means disappointing people who claim to love you. I still have difficult days when I grieve the family relationships that were damaged by choosing to put myself first, but I've never regretted standing up for my right to celebrate my happiness without shame or apology. I've never regretted choosing love that lifts me up over love that holds me down. And whenever I see a bride walking down the aisle at one of the weddings I plan, surrounded by people who are genuinely joyful for her happiness, I'm reminded that everyone deserves that kind of celebration. Everyone deserves to be surrounded by love that says yes to their dreams instead of no to their joy. The most important lesson I learned is this: you can't build a healthy future on the foundation of unhealthy patterns. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable the people you care about to continue hurting you, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose your own happiness, even when everyone around you is asking you to choose theirs instead. Today, when young women ask me for advice about family pressure around their weddings or other major life decisions, I tell them what I wish someone had told me years earlier. Your life is not a consolation prize for other people's disappointments. Your success is not a reflection on their failures. Your happiness is not responsible for their sadness. You deserve to celebrate your joy fully, openly, and without apology. And anyone who truly loves you will want that for you too.